The number one challenge is the one that's getting the least attention outside of some policymaking circles, which is the refining and smelting capacity for these minerals is almost entirely outside of Canada at this stage. But there's a long way to go, and we are playing catch up. Now we're playing catch up against people who have a huge wallet. They can afford to be leaders. But if we don't start to take a leadership position in this, we'll just be changing who we're buying our resources back from when we're trying to build things in Canada.
Over the last few years, we've heard a lot about critical minerals. Governments are talking about them, investors are talking about them, mining companies are certainly talking about them. But behind all of the headlines, there is a much bigger conversation happening around policy, around capital, geopolitics, and whether countries like Canada can actually turn ambition into real action. Welcome to the Markets and Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Lyndsay Malchuk. Now, at the same time, gold continues to grab attention, and we're starting to see signs that deal-making across the mining sector could be heating up once again. So today, we're going beyond the headlines to explore what's really happening across critical minerals landscapes and what it could mean for investors and for companies and the future of resource development right here in Northern America. And joining us is Sander Grieve, partner at Bennett Jones LLP. Sander works closely with companies, investors, and industry leaders across the mining and natural resource sector, giving him a very unique perspective on the policy challenges, the investment trends, and the strategic transactions shaping the industry today. Sander, welcome to the show. This is a really big topic, and it definitely needs a lot more limelight, so thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get into the specifics of everything, Sander, you're having conversations with industry leaders, for investors, governments, and companies every single day. What's the topic that's coming up most often right now that maybe isn't making headlines quite yet?
The immediate has been consuming a lot of attention. So it's been fun. There's a lot of money and interest flowing into the sector. Some of it is very traditional. Gold has had a great run. People are clustered around that. Silver has had a breakout, which has had people clustered around it. Some of the more traditional base metals, iron ore is a story people are following more closely than they have for several years. But the critical mineral space is kind of the forefront of where policy makers and governments and investors are trying to muddle their way through right now, which is very exciting to be a part of.
It is exciting, and I know that there is a lot of news constantly coming out about the war going on and things like that. And, we have seen quite a dip in the markets in the last week, we'll say. What are you seeing on your end? Because you see it from all different perspectives.
There's a long-term piece that's playing out here where, we have seen need to invest. Canada has, there are 32 critical minerals identified by the government. All of them exist within Canada's borders. And we now have people looking at where their supplies are coming from. And we've had a trend across our allies, south of the border and around the world, to say we want to friendshore this activity. We need to know, that it's coming from a place we understand, that has rules we understand, including rules around ownership and proper exploitation of these resources. That in a way that's friendly to the host communities that they want to be a part of. So we're seeing that kind of interest from around the world, but we're also seeing questions being asked about the bigger picture of how this fits into the global economy and the supply chain, which is far less certain.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you mention all of that because critical minerals, as you said, has become one of, if not the biggest strategic conversation in the resource sector right now. And when you look across Canada and, the broader Americas today, what do you see right now as the biggest challenge standing in the way of building a truly competitive critical mineral sector?
The number one challenge is the one that's getting the least attention outside of some policymaking circles, which is the refining and smelting capacity for these minerals is almost entirely outside of Canada at this stage. So even if we have the great success, which we are highly likely to have, there are a lot of projects going on in exploration and development of building mines for these resources. There is, in some spaces, a more than 9 in 10 chance that whatever is taken out of the ground is going to Asia to be refined. So we're ending up, buying our own minerals back from Asia, with the value add being done there, which puts us in a very
I
difficult spot.
Well, I feel like it's across the board. I mean, we do it with forestry, we do it with all the different things. Is we have the resources to get it out, but then what do we do with it? So it becomes that ongoing chasing our tail for sure. Sander, one of the themes I keep hearing is that everyone agrees critical minerals are strategically important, but there seems to be less agreement on how to actually project the build of all of those.
Absolutely.
I'm going to push your question a little bit further here, or your answer a little bit further here. Do you think policy framework in Canada is keeping pace with what's happening globally, or are we at risk of really falling behind other jurisdictions that are moving more aggressively already?
The Americans are the ones leading the way in this space. They have been investing directly in these mining companies, taking equity investments, offering up debt on better than bank terms, and offering off-taking arrangements. Other governments around the world are taking baby steps in this regard, including the Canadian government. But there's a long way to go, and we are playing catch up. Now we're playing catch up against people who have a huge wallet. They can afford to be leaders. But if we
Exactly.
don't start to take a leadership position in this, we'll just be changing who we're buying our resources back from when we're trying to build things in Canada.
So where do you think then policymakers are getting it right, and where are they still like sort of those biggest gaps still remaining?
So getting it right in terms of tax incentives to actually start the exploration project. So we are seeing that exploration end of the economy tooling up, and the tax incentives are directing people there. They are saying the right things about what the process is going to be from a regulatory point of view to develop these assets. The rubber will hit the road at some point in those conversations. We haven't arrived there yet.
Right.
Where it's going to get toughest is the hardest part, because the smelting and refining business is probably not seen to be terribly sexy in a lot of circles. It certainly has a lot of complexities to it. There's a reason why it's all done in one part of the world. But if we want to be in the game, we're going to have to put chips on the table.
Well, it's one thing for these policymakers and politicians and everything to say, yes, we are pro-mining, we're going to do it, we have all the things. It's another thing for them to really, truly understand what's happening boots on the ground. So I recently had Todd Stone on the podcast, and we talked about the 30 by 30 land agreement, and that's specifically here in BC. And so, yes, it's great that the government's saying, we got this, we can do this, we can get the critical minerals out. It's another thing for them to be putting all these restrictions on land here and land there. And even if it's not on the list, there's so many restrictions, it might as well be on the list. So this is another challenge that we are really facing, specifically in BC. What are you seeing across the sector as a whole in Canada?
BC is without a doubt the most complicated place in terms of community relations in the country, but there are complexities across the country in different quarters, and there's a need, with First Nations in particular, but with all communities, to engage, and for industry to find a way to demonstrate its value to these communities. I remember a client of ours many years ago did a piece on the women involved in their business. And it's staggering, because these are in remote communities, and they take people who have had no employment or very menial low wage, like at the minimum wage
side.
or below, frankly,
Yeah.
cash jobs, and all of a sudden these people are into six-figure jobs, and their families are changed. Their prospects for their entire family are changed by having a mining company in town. So it's really the good that can be done is extraordinary, and we've got to be more vocal in talking about it and engaging with the host communities so they know what the benefits are that can be reaped.
While governments then are working through those challenges that we are talking about here, investors then, you can probably see this, they seem to be making their own decisions about where capital is going to flow, and they're going to go where it's certain. They're not going to go where it's not certain. Gold has clearly reasserted itself as a major story over the last couple of years. It's going to be a safe haven for some people. Depends on your risk tolerance, I guess. From your perspective, what is driving that renewed interest, and do you think it's sustainable?
There are a lot of ways to invest in gold in this country. probably the majority of mining companies on the Toronto Stock Exchange are actually in gold, exploration, development, or extraction. So there are many ways to place bets there. And of those, there are many ways to place bets where you can look at the company and say it has either terrific prospectivity and reasonable likelihood of having excellent community relations and a development horizon, or you can pick even more certain bets of the majors and the mid-tier gold companies that are operating or are advanced in development, and for sure there's gold at the end of the story, and the market will put a premium on those.
Yeah, that's true. I was talking with Ivan Bebek just this morning from Copernico, and he's got a project in Peru. He has another one in Nevada, gold projects, and he was saying where he thinks we are in the season of the gold cycle, and he's feeling like in the fall there's another big major thing coming up the pipeline. Right now, it's a little bit gun shy because of everything that is going on with the war. What do you feel about this?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Like if you were to wind the tape back and say, okay, we're about to have a war, where's gold going to be? I think most of us would have called it to be on a real rip right now.
Mm-hmm.
We appear to be in a moment where cash is king. And even if it was a gold stock, if you can turn it back into cash for the immediate security feature, that's got some appeal in the market. But we expect that will turn, and we are sitting on an inflation cycle that's going to be challenging to manage. We're sitting on the printing of money across the Western world again, which is also going to be challenging to manage. And there's lots of reason for our gold clients to have some enthusiasm.
So are you seeing then meaningful difference in how investors are approaching gold compared to critical minerals as a whole today?
Yes, yeah, there are not the same variety of ways to play critical minerals. Critical minerals is either into the super majors or into mid-tier companies that have development assets that are interesting in the space, but there are fewer to choose from. And they're clustered around specific, like copper is one that we can all see. The horizon on copper is phenomenal. Supply is coming off, demand is only going to rise, and there's a great story to be told there. So we're seeing people cluster around those stories, but there aren't the multiplicity of the ways to play it that you get in gold. So it keeps the investment very focused. And then when you get into the very esoteric critical minerals down on the list of 32, it's tough to find ways to play a lot of those.
It's interesting that while gold is really attracting a lot of attention, and I think it probably always will, we're also seeing increasing competition for strategic minerals assets around the world. So from your perspective, when you look at the critical mineral space, which commodities or themes appear to be attracting the most serious strategic interest right now beyond gold and copper?
Beyond gold and copper, probably uranium is the next one that people have circled of. This has got to be a great space. There are a number of ways to play it in the market. There are great Canadian advantages in the market. So that's one that we've absolutely got a box around as a great place to be in.
Absolutely. Saskatchewan that's the Athabasca Basin, I think, which is the most richest resource for uranium worldwide, I believe it is. So, Canada has the resources right there. Now we just got to get them out. Let's flip over to M&A, okay? That's going to naturally bring us right over to all of this, because when capital starts chasing quality assets, we know that transactions usually follow. Are you seeing signs that we're entering a more active period for M&A mining in the mining sector? And if so, what's driving that activity, you think?
We have seen some, right? There's commodity demand within the companies. The majors are at the point in many assets where they need new assets to replenish what's running down. So the stocks need to be replenished. There's probably a bit of a lag in it from our perspective, just that financing is pretty easy to do right now and money's cheap. It's some people in the mid tier, some people in the lower tier mining industry are not anxious to get off of their projects. There's a lot of love there. They've spent a lot of time working on these things, and if they can continue to finance it, they'll happily do that as long as they can until some other catalyst comes along. And frequently it's the scarcity of capital. Sometimes it's just a check they can't refuse, and sometimes it's their shareholders have decided it's time to move on to the next thing. But we're seeing a bit of lag in that. as the boom has sort of settled into the boom or the renewed interest in the space.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And, for me, one of the things that stands out is how quickly geopolitical considerations have become such a massive part of the investment conversation. How much of today's deal making and investment activity is being influenced by geopolitical concerns versus just the traditional fundamentals?
Oh, a lot. Like I think the Agnico statement in Europe that they executed, the three-part transaction a couple of weeks ago, is
Yeah.
like a hallmark of what's going on, where people are looking at where's a good place to do business, where can I meaningfully advance assets in a way that I can do it that's economic, that's going to have community support, and like that was just a brilliant deal executed by them. And I expect we're going to see a lot more of that, focusing on points to do business that where you can make a difference and move the ball.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, I know we've covered policy, we've covered capital flows, commodities, and M&A, but I'd love to finish with a broader perspective here, Sander. If we're sitting here 3 to 5 years from now, what do you think will determine whether Canada emerges as a true leader in the critical minerals or misses the opportunity?
I think it's to think about this in a much bigger way. Right now, we're talking about it, and we talk about the major projects office, and we're talking about, I think now we're up to 3 or 4 mining projects that have gone through the major projects office and are being projects of national interest. We need to be adding zeros to that number. We should be talking about 1,000 projects across the country that are a priority and that must be advanced. We're not part of the way there. When you look at critical minerals, if we wind it back, look, 60,000 foot level, how do you build a battery? Right now, how you build a battery in Canada in a battery plant is, if we're lucky, a Canadian mines the material goes to China, the material is processed in China, comes back to Canada and is put into a battery. That's,
Mm-hmm.
as they would say in simpler times, that's no way to run a railroad.
Makes sense. Well, Sander, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective, and come back soon for sure.
Thank you very much.
And for everyone listening, perhaps the question worth considering is this. As countries around the world compete for the resources that will power the next generation of industry, technology, and energy, will Canada lead that future or simply supply it? Thank you for spending some time with us right here on the Markets and Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Lyndsay Malchuk, and until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep an eye on the stories shaping what's next. And always remember, these are the opinions of our own with possible vested interest in any or all of the companies we may have spoken about. This is not to be used as financial advice. Always be sure to speak with a licensed financial advisor and know your own risk tolerances. For a copy of our complete disclaimer, head over to apaton.com. We'll see you next time.